What did I teach you?
You are Duke of New York. You're a number one.
I can't hear you.
You are the Duke of New York. You're a number one.
Peace. Can everybody hear me? Hope so. Excuse me. Everybody can hear me? Excellent. Hope everybody's well, inshallah. Excellent. Hope everybody's been well. Praise be, we all here still. Another glorious day in the apocalypse and the Armageddon. You know what I mean? Watching the wicked and the judgment come to the befallen and those with stiff pride. You know what I mean? It's the time they say we supposed to be rejoicing. You know what I mean? Gas down, food down, like a lot of good stuff look like it's happening. They rolled the red carpet out for your boy the other day, which we'll get into. You know what I mean? A lot of wild stuff going down. You know? Yeah. Your boy Sleepy Joe, he rotting out from the inside. But you know, you get what your hand called for. That's what my grandmother used to say. So he been screwing people over in the behind all these years. Now they came back and literally bit him in the behind. So hey, it's on him, you know. Yeah, man. You know what I mean? This is the time. So a lot of the stars and stuff is aligning, and we need to, you know, rejoice. You know. So as we get into it, does anybody have any questions about anything before we start? What do you think about the ritual in New York with the boat? Yeah, I was going to show the bill on that too. It was interesting. It was a Mexican boat, Mexican naval boat, an old so-called schooner or well, kind of like a schooner fashion. You know what I mean? Crashing in to the American port. You know what I mean? Around the same time that the plantation, Nottoway Plantation, burning down, while at the same time a bunch of so-called uh, Moors, undeclared Moors, 11 of them escaped captivity. So I think all of those are ritualistically synchronized events, although they may not be scripted. You know what I'm saying? I think it's just a sign of the time. Yeah, then there was a tornado in St. Louis, which is old Paris, right around the same time that they want to bring France up for war crimes for all of the nuclear testing and all of the needless nuclear shit they was doing in the Fiji Islands and the bikinis and the Altos and all that. Niggas want their reparations for that. As well as the same time that in Burkina Faso they done caught 200 French Legion soldiers, CIA backed French Legion soldiers, and just ambushed them. So yeah, so then there was the fight in Pakistan and India that also was happening, but that's now they got to cool that down now because your boy went over to Saudi Arabia and got the purple carpet treatment. Purple carpet treatment is only for royalty. You know what I'm saying? So they looking at him as basically like the king of America because ultimately they know after everything collapsed and all that, it's gonna go back to an imperial monarchy anyway. So they just slowly breaking y'all into that by using the crash dummies as the first responders for this upheaval that's coming, you know, as predicted by the prophet, Noble Ali, peace be upon him. And when he said that in all shit all industry is gonna halt and when it starts back up it's gonna be in the Moors' favor. So they showing you that now, especially because it was the Saudis. And the Saudis, they're the loose cannons in the so-called Arab world because they're more connected to the original Moors, darker skinned peoples and stuff from the Western Africa that was that were rebels against the old Moorish Ottoman contingent that had been ruling the world up until the point that the British, who were now segregated into different companies, in which now the white-faced British, i.e., British people like Lawrence of Arabia and these niggas, basically got them to identify with the word with the misnomer Arab, and then got them to co-sign that, and then try to create eventually what became the Arab states. But then they didn't realize that under all of the desert was all of this oil, in which now made all of these desert herders and people who had been Bedouins before this, had been Tuaregs and Hausas and these types of people before all of this. And then one family that basically, because they have the oldest chiefs and the political strife was going on, they were able to seize control and then basically name the whole country after them because they seized the place that the pale Arabs have assimilated as Mecca since the Muhammad Musalliamit of 250 years after the original Muhammad lived. That whole story with Khadija and all of that, her being a Jesuit or Catholic, Roman Catholic or whatever. They went with them to empower them to rebel against all of us. You see what I'm saying? Once they got their little pocket of Islam, that's why they was regulated to the Eastern Horn of Africa and Arabia. We all over the world, above them. That's why Andalusian Moors, you know what I mean? Other than after the fall of Baghdad, that's when we was like, you know what I mean? Our kind of rule over there was kind of like uh, waning, and so we let the pale Arabs and the what you call it and the converso Morisco type niggas hold that, and then we went back to Andalusia and the rest of the world. You know what I'm saying? So they always relegated to their little version of Islam, and then that's when they started creating their own versions of shit, and that's when you get the Wahhabism and the Sunnism and all of that type of stuff, and then the Hadiths and all that. Even though the Quran says that Allah don't listen to no Hadiths but His own, so you know what I mean? Like, it's a lot of stuff that can't be reconciled with all of that. That's why we didn't really deal with all of that dogmatic stuff that they was doing with, because a lot of them were old Persian clerics anyway, who had were just trying to find a new way to bring Zoroaster and the rest of them old gods back into the modern lexicon by using names like Allah and the Magnificent One and all that shit as um, veils. You know what I mean? As placeholders for what they was really dealing with. That's why we different. That's why we just different. You know what I'm saying? Like, you could be a Muslim like them if you want. You know what I mean? And do it how they do it. However, we Moors, we predate all of that. We was doing it when it wasn't even called that. You know what I'm saying? But whenever it was called that, we was still calling ourselves and being referred to as Moors. So we Moors, we even older than the religious practices that they doing. You understand? But if you want to submit yourself to that type of practice for whatever spiritual reason, you're more than welcome to do that. But that's not necessarily your mandated way to be, because again, you also help shepherd and create elements of that for them to be able to have a society and come out of the bestial way of life that they was all dealing with. They was dealing with blood feuds. They was marrying their sisters. They was having sex with babies. Like, they was wilding. Somebody had to come in there and clean all that up. So periodically, we would go throughout the empire and just round these dudes up, clean them up, move them out, and then install, try to reign for a little while or whatever, and then eventually, the people of that area would eventually either marry into, or we would leave. You know what I mean? This is why the United States is doing what it's doing all out the world. This is what so-called Americans, us like Moors, we always did. We traveled the world and we brought everybody together. You know what I mean? And then when we found oppression, we would stomp it out. You know what I mean? Unfortunately, towards the waning part, some of us became the oppressors. And thus, other members of us had to come and stomp them out. You understand? Very simple. So this I want to show you. Let grandma tell you. You know what I'm saying? Let me see if I can play it.
They say I saw a video where somebody was saying that back in the days, if you was called black, then that was like a derogatory.
It was.
It was.
You couldn't call me black. You can call me Afro-American. You can call me nigger. You can call me Negro.
Right.
You couldn't call me color.
Right.
Because I said everybody got color.
Right.
So how you would call me color? I'm a human being.
Right.
And you address me as a human being.
Right.
I'm a child of the king.
Right.
I have to tell them that. And I said, you're going to address me accordingly.
Yeah, I definitely, I don't know.
I refuse to this day, I don't accept none of
those terms?
No.
Right.
If they put it on my application, I refuse to put it up there.
Yeah, I put Yamasi up there.
I was in that crazy. I'm from the soil of this land.
Right.
And that's all I'm putting up there.
Right.
Amen to that. That's where the Creator created me. He said, but dust you came and dust I'm going to return.
Right.
Well, that's what I believe.
Right.
We did invite them.
Right.
In our land. We invited everybody you see in our land, we invited them.
Right.
And what Granny has the mistake we made, we slept with them.
Right.
And we had children for them.
Right.
And then we fought against the men.
Right.
And the women didn't have no, we killed them. We were strong warriors.
Right.
And we was able to kill the men off.
Right.
So the women didn't tell their children about how we did their daddies.
Right.
And taught them to hate us.
Right.
You know? And it took 5 nations to come together to take this land away from us.
Oh, okay.
5 nations. One nation couldn't do it.
Right.
They had to get the Africans.
Right.
They had to get the Mongolians. I'm not pronouncing it right. You don't know.
No, it's Mongolians. No, you pronouncing it right.
And they had to get the Asian.
Right.
They had to get the Middle Eastern.
Right.
And the
question about back in the day. So they say I saw a video where somebody was saying that.
So you see what I'm saying? So you see what I'm saying, right? So if Granny know, and you see how she was in all orange, like Oshun, like, seen that? When you ever heard anybody tell it like that? Besides us. That's what we've been saying. For how many years? When has anybody told us so-called black history or American history like that? Never. 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 Nah, Granny was saying that we was invaded by 5 nations. But what happened was when we invited them over, it was all good until we started sleeping with them. That's where they went wrong. See? More went wrong by sleeping with them. And then what happened was the men of those other nations would get jealous or whatever because now their babies, you know what I'm saying, their women was having babies for us, and then therefore they was now under our jurisdiction. And then the men were basically being forced into labor because this was the way. Then it got to the point where the rich melanated Moors had so much bread and they was charging so much excess on them that they didn't have a means to pay. So they had to start paying with their women. Well, that's what they felt they had to do because that's what they did. You know what I'm saying? And then it's got progressively worse from there. And then, the rest is history as we know it. But essentially, this is what the whole beef and everything was about. And then they started to, like I said, learn our tactics. And but then what happened was the women started teaching the children to hate us. You see what I'm saying? For killing their fathers and stuff. But remember, these were people who at the time was just literally coming into civilization as people. Like they wasn't even seen as that at one point. You understand? That's why the actual practice was named of slavery was named after them. It was coined for them because they were the only ones going through it like that. We was going through it under the prisoners of war thing, which got more extensive as time moved on. You understand? Yes, that's what they did. That's what I've been telling people for years. You didn't marry into your slave name is your name. That name that you have was adopted by the slaves and thus became known as a Slavic name. You understand? Because then they made you deny your name after that because you cut yourself off from your noble nature or got cut off from it, against your will, regardless of whatever it is. So that's what they've been doing. They've been marrying into your estates and then conning you to believe that they were always theirs. No, no. So when they talk about old money, they talk about the money that they stole from y'all. You understand? That they've been funneling out of y'all. When they talk about new money, they talk about the amalgamated money. You understand? That's made from the new stuff. That's the post-fiat era. The old money is all of the old asset stuff based and owned by people that you see on your screen. You know what I'm saying? More is like this, us, who fell into different camps after things started to go awry, specifically after 492. You know what I'm saying? That's when everything hit the head. That's why everything keeps coming back to that, because they want to disassociate it from the Cristobal Colon thing, but it's synonymous because one event led to the other. But they want you to believe that they came from Spain all the way over there. But what did they tell you? They told you that Cristobal Colon of the Colon family, the so-called Collins family, right, of the Colonnade, right, House Colonnade, they were the ones who got permission from who? The Portuguese, right? Joseph, King Joseph and them niggas, right? He got money from the Portuguese, right? Well, they want you to believe that they launched the expedition from Portugal over there. But remember, under King Josephus or Gustav or whoever it was, he moved the kingdom to Brazil. So when they're talking about Portugal, they're talking about Brazil. So that means he sailed up from Brazil to where? Hispaniola, which was a part of the old Creole Empire, right? The old Aethean Empire, or excuse me, the old Lacono Empire, which was almost the local empire of the Antilles before you started getting up into the mainland. You understand what I'm saying? They got you thinking that they're coming from across when they already did that. They launched all of these campaigns from here, Portugal and Brazil, right? So the Portuguese people are Portugal over there, right? But then they set up a whole nother kingdom over here. In where? Brazil. And then help foster the because they were all basically also Romans who just got their titles back. So between 1492 and about 1555, let's say, right? When the good ship Jesus and all that shit start coming into play. Between that era is like the lowest. This is when the Moors are getting thrown into the war camps. This is when all of that crazy stuff is going down. This is when the culmination now of it starts coming back, and now the Moors like, nah, we coming back in power. So from that point on, they start pushing back, and the Sultans of America start sending out expeditions all over the world, right? Because they're battling the dumb diverses. Well, they're battling the Intercaterra. Well, the surrender of Granada was basically just a transfer of ownership for a limited time. And then once they saw that the Romans was going to violate it, that's when they was like, well, we just going to keep it going. We just going to turn it up. And then those lands that were to be given over, the Sultans at that time told Moors, y'all shouldn't stay. Y'all should bounce. Let us regroup, come take it back, and then everybody could come back. But a lot of Moors didn't want to do that. They wanted to stay wherever they was at. So they didn't understand the plan per se. Was to draw back, let them get ensconced in the environment, let them get caught up in the architecture, all that, let them think they running shit, and then boom, we're gonna come back at full force and then trap them. because now they not going to want to give all that up, but they're going to be trapped. But some Moors, they know that, so they just wanted to stay and build where they was at. And then once they was there now under this new so-called government, even though these niggas was light skinned and brown skinned and looking Dominican and all of that, they now looking at themselves as different from the traditional, again, Andalusian type, American type Moors, so-called American Indian type Moors that have always up until this point been free. So now they forcing them, if you want to stay, you got to get baptized and all that, not knowing that this was now them, if they get baptized, right, under the crown, under the auspices of the crown, right, the Spanish race classification. If they get baptized under the auspices of the crown, then that means technically they are also pledging their God to be uh, uh, Ferdinand and Isabella, right? Which then gives them the right to convey all of their deeds to their sovereign because they're accepting their jurisdiction, i.e., protection. And now that they've done that, they now sign over their papers and now they think they're going to stay. And then what do? They round them up, go hang them, put them on pikes and all of that. Then they take the deeds, the titles, the treaties, and then they ship those down, like I said, to Brazil, where they done set up the strongholds at, where now they moving Moors back and forth, trafficking them, right? So they could maintain control over the land, right? So we're not having that. We're all still on a global sense, we're still kicking their ass all over the place. We take over Constantinople in 453. We all of that happened leading up to 1492. So by the time that happened, all of the military strategy and stuff had to be reorganized. You see what I'm saying? It had to be redistributed because now you got Moors growing up in these Christian concentration camps, right? That used to house the prisoners of war that tried to invade us, that we put on these camps. So when you see these so-called black slaves that's on these camps and all that, and you think, oh, they was imported from Africa, a lot of them were the Congolese peoples that was brought over here to fight on behalf of the Portuguese, because the Portuguese, the Congolese, right, was all working together out of out of Rome, aka Brazil, aka Portugal, right, and was working to come up here and invade and do all the stuff Randy was talking about. So we shut them niggas down. The ones we didn't kill, we put into concentration camps. Those concentration camps became the plantations of later date. By the time we get to the changeover in what they call the antebellum period, where now the Vatican is cashing in on all of the Jesuit deeds that they've extracted, and now they're redesignating everybody through law because they can legally become they sureties to the state because they're listed as contraband and Indian and things like that that's owned by the U.S. So think about it. The Union of the Six Nations dissolves, right? In what we are calling the Iroquois Confederacy and all this, that gets transferred. That national government gets transferred, right? And a new constitution is created in which the vested interest of those people, right, is now put into this new compact between them, right, and the so-called slaves that they had basically fought to a stalemate at that point. Okay, these slaves are mulatto, so-called prisoners of war, right, who were under the brutish crown, which is the Moorish crown, due to the fact that the Moors had protection under His Britannic Majesty, the same way brutish Moors, right, had protection under His Sultanic Majesty. Everybody understand? So therefore, you could get protection from Britain, right, if you was in league with them, right, because you were subject of the Sultan. Subjects of the Sultan is different than being a subject to the king. You understand? You being a subject of is different than being a subject to. Subject of means that, again, all Moors, we are all subjects of the Sultan, right? But he don't tell us what to do. You know what I'm saying? Unless you've pled fealty to that particular Sultan. But there was mad Sultans over here. the Emirates of Cordoba, like all, it was mad of us. It was mad of us. Land of 1,000 sultans. Everybody had kingdoms. Everybody had dominions and villages and shit under their protection and all that. We was all unified through the confederacies. But once that main stronghold fell, that's when everything started bugging. You see what I'm saying? And everybody started being on some every man for itself type stuff, at least for about 80 years after the fall. You know what I'm saying? And then you had new orders and new Moors coming up that's referring to themselves as different things and moving over. So you see here, when they talk about the Yaqub human breeding sites, if you match them up with the so-called maps of the so-called transatlantic slave trade, you see they're all basically the same points, right? Because we're looking at this as being disconnected or being traveling through that. And we're always assuming that they had the control over the ship and the seaways, but they did not because they were imported. All Caucasians and free white people were under something called the Transportation Act. And that was for criminals and people who got caught up in the wars and went into criminality and shit after that, as well as those Slavic Circassian slaves that was being imported for the global market. And some of them were given extreme posts, right? If they wanted to think. So if they did a certain amount of crimes, they'd be like, all right, you want it like that? Well, you either do time in the Tower of London or you get sent on transportation to one of the colonies. And that's what they started doing to them. This is how the colonies started to become so degenerate. You understand? Whereas the free white persons, they had the ability to come out of the bondage because they were not of the so-called Caucasus races, which we'll get into. Okay? So after the whole thing happened, right? And as you see the Born Stone right there, that's showing you, that's the marker from Hanno Bay linking the Americas or the Moors here in America to the ancient world through what they call the Born Stone, which was the annexation stone and the proclamation that said that this was now back part of the ancient Carthaginian or what they call Phoenician Empire. Understand? At the bottom. Contacted the Bornstone Society to get some sort of legal representation or citation on it. They can't even do it. They done built a whole society around this thing, but they don't have the ability to certify copies of it or nothing. They don't even want people to really see it like that. This is what annexes you and I to that. This is also written about in the book, The Algonquin Conquest of the Mediterranean Region by Samuel Poe, 11,500, which corresponds to the Younger Dryas era. Right? So this, I'm giving you illustrations as to why this shit is happening and why we had to be buried for so long, because all of this is really tied up in the money. It's just like everything. It's always the money with these people. Okay? So this global Moorish thing that we was doing had gone all the way back from ancient times. You understand? And these cities, as we know, have always been here and all of that. And these people just inherited it in different Moors of different eras, utilized it or utilized them. You know what I'm saying? And re-inhabit them, refurbished them, made sure that they was all good, because we had the type of technology like you see right here, where we was using flying vehicles and things like that. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is nothing new to us. This is where Da Vinci was able to get these things from. You understand? He wasn't doing nothing new. He was just redrawing stuff that he was privy to because he wasn't part of the Inquisition. He had special privileges based upon his Freemasonic relationships. You know what I mean? Yeah, his blood title. So people like Prince Uriel Bey, he already synced that up with us. So as you see, this confederacy goes all the way back hundreds of years. Understand? These bricks you see right here, they don't even make bricks like this no more. You know what I'm saying? We've been talking about all of this brick dust, all that. Have you noticed that? Did you hear the Nike just came out with the red brick Jordans? The red brick Jordans. Like, yo, like we're controlling the narrative. Like, we don't even really see. But this is what I'm saying. So if the Confederate, and this is in Brooklyn. This shit I'm showing you is in Brooklyn, bro. Not Novajarli Avenue. That's in I think that's either in Detroit or Chicago somewhere. But no, these bricks right here, this with the Confederate flag on it, this is in Brooklyn, bro. It's right here. Didn't no Union 21 nigga from Union 12 from the Teamsters make this shit? You know what I'm saying? Like no union rep, no contractor nigga from the 20s or the 30s came and made this. Are you bugging? You understand? So we are already where we're at, where we're supposed to be. We fell where we at. So you just keep coming back to the same places. Yeah, more because they always are going to be behind what the Moors is talking about, while never giving the Moors the credit because they're the ones that sold us out. Okay, you ain't never heard no so-called American Indian. None of these niggas come out here and start talking about real money and how their ancestors was trading. We're the ones talking about that. I just did a whole thing last week on the trade and triumph that was going on between the Catawba and the Wabanaki and the Montauk and them and the Ojibwa and them down in North Carolina. And how the real Transylvania is in North Carolina. That's where the Drakenbergs and them niggas started, which we're gonna get into as well. Just like today, you got certain members of your family that might be into like Illuminati satanic type shit. You know what I'm saying? This is where this is coming from. This is where these people this is how they are. You know how you may have had that cousin that went through that goth phase or whatever? Like, this is what this is. Just think about it back then. You know what I mean? So this is where the rubber meet the road. So what I'm saying is that these so-called Native American people that they're calling themselves to be, these American Indians, these are the guys that actually did us in. Okay? All of these people claiming they Cherokees and they this and that, like, that's cool. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's cool. It's just you got if you're gonna take it, then you gotta, just like we gotta, as Moors, we gotta take the good with the bad that we did. They gotta do the same thing, man. Y'all can't just act like y'all was just always just cool and was never fighting and how to do none of that. You know what I mean? Like, y'all was bugging. Y'all was doing some wild shit to the original people that was already here. And then there was parts of y'all that grouped up to help wipe out everybody else so y'all could be the ones. You know what I mean? Just like today. Just like today, man. So we're gonna get into that. Anybody have any questions before I get into this next part? I'm just getting stuff out. See how they coming out now talking about gingers, people with red hair is melanated as Moors. That's why they get hated on by white people. Yeah, it's true to a degree. Like, Malcolm X is one of those redhead Scottish type, Pictish type Moors. You know what I'm saying? Of the red blood. There was a whole so-called clan or tribe called the Red Bones. You know, and they was all light skinned. You know what I mean? Like, this is facts. Like, this is shit that's real. It's just that we're given the runaround history of it because it doesn't benefit them to make sure that we know, you know what I mean, who did what. So on your screen, this the Barbary company. I've been talking about it for a while or whatever. And this is the company that where all the other companies that came after. Okay. So when people start talking about all of this about how Caucasian people were the Europeans and they was doing, nah, man. What really happened is after the Younger Dryas situation happened, all of them people was cut off. This continent, according to the book Oriental Masonry, this continent was the first one to rise up out the water after the deluge, right? After that happened, we now became the predominant group to help reassess and bring humanity back into balance now after this octave had now shifted. And so we set out and started to make contact, redress contact, bring these people back into civilization. That's what the Phoenician and the Carthaginian expansions and all of that stuff was actually about back in the day. It wasn't just about conquering, because everything was messed up still. What Noah did when he came with the ark, according to the book Time Walker by Meredith Quinn, he is the first to establish admiralty law and how goods and services should be transported across the waters. His excursion, his journey in doing that is what set the foundation for what all admiralty practices and stuff was going to be after that. You understand? Whether you call him Noah or Gilgamesh, whoever. What we know is that he was not no melanated person, and the only reason why that's important is because they have tried to convince us that everybody in history, right, that somehow black people or melanated people, right, specifically have derived from Caucasian people somehow, and that is impossible. They want to say that we were derived or whatever, or we directly or genetically related or come directly genetically from a monkey hominid named Lucy out of a place called Africa, where that's not even that place's name. So in that, they're not even trying to relate us to the hominids that came from Africa before that. They're trying to relate us to the ancient ones that was there that allegedly weren't even phenotypically human at the point. But what bonded them was the fact that they was dark skinned. So you can't go with that either. Listen to what Granny said. She said, God gave us this land. Nobody can say where we come from. Nobody. The only one that can say in which we come from is the internal aspect of us, and we know who and what that is. And nobody else got that. That's why they want to alter us at every point. Instead of wiping us out, they couldn't do that. So what did they do? They had to start to wipe our memories, so that way every incarnation we come back, it take longer for us to get everything together. When all of these people had a hand in it. Okay? So what we did after 1492 was we told Elizabeth, look, we helped you get back into power and all of that, and we know them dirty Moors that's in the Sultanate of Rome, because that's the name of the Turkish Empire. Y'all know that, right? The name of the old Turkish Empire of the so-called Seljuks and them was the Sultanate of Rome, because all they was trying to do was reorganize Rome. That's all we've ever been trying to do. Reorganize it so that way it's not so bloodthirsty and pagan. It's always Rome and then Carthage and Rome, or in modern times it became the Moors against the Spanish. It's the same thing. You know what I'm saying? The pagans, the heathens and the pagans, right? Versus the traditionalists or the purists. Another way to say it in Masonry is the war between the ancients and the moderns. It's the same thing. So after that whole thing happened, after 492, we seen what was happening. We started to reconsolidate power and decided to actually establish now formal waqifs all over the world. These waqifs are what English people call trusts, okay? And as those trusts were set up, yes, we're going to read that. We're going to read that too. I'm going to show you. So it's in the room. So we decided that we had to start to consolidate that, because what Rome was doing was taking the spoils. Spain was doing exactly what Al-Qaeda did when they pulled out of of Afghanistan. Remember when Biden left all of the arms and all that stuff there, and these niggas just came up. Now they have fighter jets and shit. Don't got nobody know how to fly them, and all these guns and arms. That's basically what happened in those lands that had been reconquested by Spain. That's why the so-called Romans, aka Spanish, aka dirty pagan Persian Moors, they now had control of the so-called Moorish Armada, which they redesignated as the Spanish Armada. And then they decided that they were now going to force these Moors, who were the Armadaists, to be able to act as raiders and privateers and raid Moorish ships and British ships and all of that. But what they didn't know was that all of the Moors, who were the real admiralties and all of that, were offered letters of marque and reprisal by Elizabeth. And so the Armada was coming to basically wipe everybody out, but because these Moors were the real navigators and the real admirals, admiralissimos, they basically shut the whole shit down, shut the Armada down, took all of the spoils, and then took all that money and then set up what we see right here, the Barbary Company, which at the time was called the Morocco Company. But you see it spelled with an A, right? That's how it's spelled on the original charter. So this is an American company. You know what I'm telling you? This was an American, a Moorish American company that was rebranded. Then they started calling it the Barbary Company. Because with the bread, we started re-establishing the Barbary powers in the so-called Barbary states. So Pete, the Barbary Company, Morocco Company, or Barbary Company was a trading company established by the Sultan of Morocco, which is America. Because remember, there is no Morocco in that place we call Morocco at this point in the 1500s. So they talking about here. When they talking about Morocco, they talking about America, specifically Philadelphia, Marrakesh, that area where they signed the Declaration, the Treaty of Peace and Friendship Act. So, because Elizabeth was sympathetic to the Moors, she entered into partnership with them. And then what they decided to do was outlaw slavery. Who did they say was the first people to outlaw slavery in the world? Was it the United States? No. The Brutish, right? The brute Moors. Why? Because the Spanish had switched the slave trade where they wasn't taking Slavs as slaves no more. They taking Moors. They imprisoning Moors. They imprisoning Moors, sending them to secret rendition sites, aka plantations, aka slave ports, right? They're using dirty Africans, right? They're using dirty Portuguese, they're using dirty Belgians, and they just human trafficking people. Keep moving them. Because they're creating a shadow market. They're creating a black market that mirrors what was actually happening to them. Remember, the abolitionist movement of the 1800s were white people petitioning for their own freedom against the Moors. The war against the British or the Brutish was against the old Moorish Empire and the government that had rulership over here in the name of the Sultan being administered by the crown. Okay? Exactly. Yes. So the Barbary Company, Queen Elizabeth and him, they set up of England, right? 1585 through a patent granted to the Earls of Warwick and Leicester, as well as 40 others. All of these are Moors, right? So in Moorish British peerage, an earl is a title of nobility ranking below a marquis and above a viscount. It is a hereditary title passed down to male heirs. This is why the male Moors, the males, the so-called black males, are the ones that are always targeted because we all have interest in this company. Yes, the Earl. So what was DMX's real name? Earl Simmons, right? Right. Because the Earls, the Dukes, the Barons, the Viscounts, the Marquises, the counts, all of these are Moorish terms, right, of nobility under a British system. You understand? So the Duke of Lancaster is a Moroccan, or was a Moroccan, who allegedly had an affair with her. Okay? Exactly. And in the movie, and in the Bismarck video, wasn't he dressed up when he, and you got on, wasn't he dressed up like a Moorish earl when he was playing the piano, remember? In the castle? Yeah. Okay. What is a Moor? A Moor is an officer in the Isle of Man who summons the courts for the several sheddings. The office is similar to an English bailiff of 100. Bailiff is bailick. Okay? Because in order for you to leave the jurisdiction, you would have to have leave of the bey. And if you had leave of the bey, you had a good bey. Thus, goodbye. Islam? So we know what the bailiffs are. The bailiffs are the officers of the 100, right? Well, what are the sheddings? Let's see what sheddings mean. The sheddings, a riding, a tithing, or division in the Isle of Man, where the whole island is divided into 6 sheddings. In each of which there is a coroner or a chief constable appointed by a delivery of a rod at Tanwal Court or annual convention in the Isle of Man. So this is the place, the Isle of Man, where the court would be summoned for the several sheddings. The several sheddings were where all of the 6 what? The 6 sheddings, in each of there is a coroner or chief constable appointed by a delivery of a rod at Tanwal Court. So what they're saying is this is where the corporations are set, because the corporations are dead. What did they used to call the auditor back in old England times? You know what they used to call him? The coroner. Yes, they would call him the coroner because he would analyze who was alive and still able to pay the debts that they owed. Whether because niggas used to fake their deaths and all that to get out of shit. That's why the constable was there. Yes. The key is the rod, because the rod is the staff. This is the same rod or staff that the Al-Qaidids would hold when they was holding court in America. But think about what they're saying with the six sheddings. How many nations invaded? How many nations invaded? What did Granny say, right? She says 6, right? Those were the corporation. We were invaded by the corporate aspects of these people who took control under the several sheddings and took control of the hundreds. So Pete, but the idea as well as the collective liability as of the division was probably known to the ancient German peoples, the Moors. As we find the same thing established in the Frankish kingdom under Clothaire. The Franks are the old Haitians. And the old Creole. Back when they was referring to them as the Franconians. Right? But then peep this. So what are the hundreds? The hundreds. Under the Saxon organization of England, each county or shire comprised of indefinite number of hundreds. each hundred containing 10 tithings, see, or group of 10 families or freeholders or frank pledges, meaning free pledges. The hundred was governed by a high constable and had its own court, but its most remarkable feature was the corporate responsibility of the whole for the crimes or defaults of the individual members. The introduction of this plan of organization into England is commonly ascribed to Alfred, another Moor. What was that high council called? It was called the Hundred Gemot, also called the Wittenagemot. And it, among the Saxons, who were the Moors, a meeting or court of freeholders of 100, meaning a board of directors of a corporation, which have asset times a year, and possess times a year, and possess civil and criminal jurisdiction and what? Ecclesiastical powers. So now let's read it again. A Moor is an officer in the Isle of Man who summons the courts for the several sheddings. The office is similar to the English bailiff of the hundreds. So we've already established that this whole corporate endeavor, as we know corporations today, were first established by us, for us, by free Moors who held free names and titles in both English as well as so-called Moorish, as well as German, or any of the 6 nations, i.e. corporations, i.e. hundreds, that were set up under the Barbary Company. The companies, other hundreds created under the Barbary Company were the British East India Company, the British West India Company, the African Company. All of those had letters and marks of reprisal and were underwritten by the Moroccan Moorish Empire of America, reinforced by the so-called Crown of England. And all of the 6 nations that were a part of it had to submit, right? Peep this. It's how they put it in your face. Make you party to it. Here we go. 6 flag parks are named after the 6 different flags that have flown over the state of Texas: Spain, France, Mexico, the Republic of Texas, the Confederate States of America, and the United States. The original flag was formed around these nations. Right? So this is what I'm saying when it comes to us and why we're so dejected, because in us specifically maintaining our identity means that as Moors, as I just showed you, when you declare that, you're basically saying you are a part of the High Gemot, which means that you are a bailiff in the Isles of Man, which means anywhere, any island that's surrounded by water that got a corporation on it, you are the head. You understand what I'm telling you? This is why the hate is so intense. Because you are the one that put all of them in check. You understand what I'm saying? You put all of them in check and made them all pay. The money that they are using today is your money, literally. The money that the US is using is coming from the exhaustive treasury that existed from the time that they switched governments. That's why they needed you to be sureties under the new government, because you would have automatically been running it, which you were. But remember, this was now a compact government where the so-called European would have limited liability in it. So the only way that he would be able to take control of the corporation would be to make you go beyond the sea, because he still got to follow the rules of the hundreds. And the rule of the hundreds, which the Cestui we trust annexed itself to, was that if you were placed beyond the sea for 7 years, you could be declared livingly, dead, and then your estate could be seized. They found a way, a reach around with that when it came to the baptism by getting everybody to be baptized. And in the baptized agreement, you sign over all your documents, all your property to the Church of the King, thereby going from subject of the Sultan to subject to the crown. You see? Which then made you not a Moor, which then means that they could then round you up under the Vagrancy Acts and stuff they was doing to all of the Congolese and the other ones that had now been outlawed for what they was doing. Because the Vatican itself was just set up as a means of international trade between countries on behalf of the Moorish Empire. So see all of these counts? See all of these crests right here? With Hamilton, see, didn't Alexander Hamilton, wasn't he the bank for the Republic? Right? Wasn't he from Barbados or something? A so-called mulatto, right? Him and Madison wrote the Federalist Papers, which then laid out how the Constitution was to be interpreted by people who fell under it. Beaumont, the Umfrail, right? The Earls of Angus, the Lords of Prudhoe, the Earls of Lancaster, Leicester and Lancaster, the same thing. The Barons of Cadzau. Cadzau is also Cadiz, who again are the Moors. But because you think they got names like Earls and shit like that, you think you're talking about white people. Come back to that. Here we go. The ceded country was inhabited by numerous tribes and nations of so-called Indians who were independent both of us and of the Americans. They were the real proprietors of the land, and we had no right to transfer to others what did not belong to ourselves. This injustice was greatly aggravated by the consideration that those aboriginal nations had been our faithful allies during the whole contest, and yet no stipulation was made in their favor. See, this is the white people now coming in, the Slavs, now with limited jurisdiction because they fighting for us and stuff. They coming in now trying to make the so-called Moors that's already in the Republic subordinate to them. Contrary to the popular belief, the Spanish amalgamated Moors did not drive the Moors out of their country. It was a territory purchased between two families, Chief Abdullah El Zagal, Boabdil's uncle, and Queen Isabella I for 5 million Maravedi, which is $17 million today, on November 25th, 491, aka 1491. You see how that's an I? So that's 491. A legal procedure no different than the Treaty of Louisiana and Florida, which were also land purchases, see, between families. But then one side want a bigger piece of the pie, more of the deal. So then they start tripping, and then they start rallying up their slaves, putting guns in their hand, and then sending them out to then wreak havoc. All of these people were regrouping themselves after the fall of that period. And they started to refer to themselves as different things in order to maintain a semblance of a new dynasty, when really they all still the same Moors in secret. See right here. Suleiman, the son of Muhammad, son of Abdullah, son of Ishmael, prince and house and dynasty of Hassan. This is America now. Who signed the treaty of peace of friendship? Hassan, right? As he was from the Hassanite dynasty that was over here, right? Who has ever upheld the power of God, Sultan of Fez of Morocco, that's Philadelphia and the New York area, and Sousse and Draha, so that's the whole eastern seaboard, right? Together with all the territories of the West. So that's all the jurisdictional territories under the jurisdiction of the Sultan of America and the Barbary coast. The Barbary coast is what we today call the Atlantic coast. Our dearly beloved, cherished, exalted by the power of God, Sultan George III, Sultan of the territories of the United Kingdom of Britain, Ireland, Duke of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, that's North Carolina, Prince descended from the dynasty of the Sultans of Rome and Palestine. The so-called Ottoman Turkish Empire was referred to as the Sultanate of Rome. So that means he was, again, a part of that whole jurisdictional thing. Remember, the so-called, when the Moors fell, the Spanish and the Europeans got their titles back, started running rampant, trying to imprison other Moors, switch documents, kidnap people, all of that. While at the same time that's happening, they marrying into families, right? Switching sides. But through all of that, the familial ties still remain. So that's why you can have a king named George, and then the guy fighting against him is also named George. The king got Saxon blood in him, right? The Moor, George Washington, got Huguenot blood in him. Both aspects of that bloodline are Moors, period. Sitting next to him, sitting next to that blurb is King Honorius, right? And then sitting next to him is the Archduke of the Holy Roman Empire. But what the white man do, he show you a bunch of pictures and say that they all of the same person. So all the pictures of the dark skin on the page is supposed to be of Saint Maurice. So that means any picture you see, no matter what color the Moor is, whatever, that's supposed to be Saint Maurice. We're already in Africa, or the northern part of it, because our portion of it, us on the East Coast, which is exactly where the Barbary Coast and 13 colonies was positioned at, is right there connected to not only the Alps in America, but the Atlas in or at Morocco. All part of the same plate. But the bloodlines, like I said, go back longer than we even know. Like everybody think that the European is the one who made up the double eagle, but it's been over here the whole time. See what I'm saying? That's why it was possible for Carlos Quintos to marry into the Inca family, and at the same time the Holy Roman Empire is using the double-headed black eagle as the symbol representation of it. This, the spiritual side of the eagle is the scorpion or the crow. That's why crows and eagles have so much beef, because they say the crow is the dark side of the eagle and the eagle is the light side of the crow. Yes, Thomas Jefferson did say that. Let's see. Hold up. Same thing here in America. This on the other side is what was the Maya version, and then this is the American version. The American version, the wild turkey or the mystic Turk, the Great Seal, the original United States Republic. This was painted at the top of St. Paul's Chapel in 1789. The first place George Washington prayed for the United States covenant, meaning the covenant the United States made with the original backers, i.e., the Moors, whether it be Hanson or anybody else that was a part of the old national government that was in league with the Sultan. Understand? From St. Paul's Chapel, the first place Washington played, the original hallowed consecration ground. So as you see, the original symbol was a wild turkey, right? This is the Turk from Alaska, from the halls of Montezuma, see, right here, to the shores of Tripoli. Yeah, so let's also peep this. So, like I said, they started tripping after a while, and we had to start launching campaigns to shut a lot of these squares out of business because they was literally trampling on the rights of the people. And this is like our people, you know what I mean? Okay, so let's set this straight. So it's already documented at the UN, and everywhere else, that the Washita Moors, right, in Henry Turner versus the United States, already showed and proved and claimed that they are the oldest, and it's already been verified. And emphasis again on the Moors, the Moorish part. Okay, so this is the first time in modern history where people were standing up, saying this about themselves, and were attracting so much reverence and attention that they started also getting a lot of bad attention from groups that were looking to profit from that. Some of those groups happen to be so-called white, what we would consider white neo-Nazi or nationalists. They were fronting something at the time that was referred to as the Patriot Movement. I don't know if y'all remember that. And they were realizing that they had reached a dead end because the history their forefathers and shit gave them was bullshit. So they started rocking with them and trying to get cool with Washita and all of that. And then eventually, the rest is history. But it's already established that these Moors, who were the Washita, who were also connected to the old Moorish Confederacy, going all the way back to the 1600s, to those Delaware Moors that first made the relationship under the Sultan um, with the British, went into business, set up the Barbary Company, whatever. Right? So those people are the Ananuia, right? The Ananuia, the Unanuia, the Talsalagi, the Chalkalagi, the Chartalagi, the Cherokee, the Chorakai, the Talsalagai, the Talsalagi, the Shishalagi, the Chartagi, or the Gowana Ishidi, right? That's us. That's the Moors. Okay? They were the ones who were targeted. Okay? And they were the ones who went to war constantly against those who were a part of the generations that, after the fall of Granada and the mass influx of Moors coming in, there was like a mixture. So you had the what is it called? Prior to the fall of Granada, which is Jerusalem and all of that, right? You have the Tarvalashim, right? That means the Moors that was already here of Hebrews' descents, right? Not Hebrew in the sense of a race, Hebrew in the sense of a oral bloodline tradition, right? It's them, right? Then after Granada, you get what's called the Morgoroshim, right? These are the ones who were forced out in Granada and then came here to their ancient ancestral thing where their ancient peoples was at, but they didn't have like direct relationship with them. So there's a difference almost in how they was relating to the Torah as to how they was, because the Morgoroshim, they're coming and they have written Torahs and all of that, where the Tovodashim that was already here, they got the Torah and all that in they memory. You know what I'm saying? They in the cities and the schools and stuff it's a different type of learning system. So it's those peoples whose lands got targeted and shit like this, right? Because they were still under Sharifan law, right? Sharifan law is what Moors deal with, Muslims deal with. Sharia law is what Muslims deal with. Okay, different. And under Sharifan law, right, which is, you see, Sharif and chief is spelled the same way. Sharif and Sharif, same. And the Sharifan state is every subject of, see, subjects of, meaning you free, right? Your protection is under the jurisdiction of this whatever sultan or whatever person is representing the Sharifan government at the time. But every subject of the Sharif estate is regarded to as a Moroccan, whether he is a Muslim or not. Every Moroccan has the right to an individual liberty, provided that he does not interfere with the liberty of others. Individual liberty consists in each citizen being able to do and say and write what he likes, on condition that he respects the public order. According to personal condition, primary education is obligatory. Freedom of expression is permitted, provided that the public order is respected. All Moroccans are equal in terms of functions of the Magzin, meaning the lands under the jurisdiction of the Sultan, which are distributed in accordance with the competence of the individual and not through the intermediaries or money. An illiterate cannot occupy a post in the Magazine. A civil servant must be able to read and write Arabic correctly, and so forth and so on. So those are the laws that were happening within the Sultanate, right? So people who don't like that is not really feeling that, because that's the laws that these Ananuias and these peoples was under. In America, they also refer to it under veil as the Great Law of Guyanaschwa, right? So that's who these people are. These people, you claiming to be these people now, you might have a problem, because you can't be both. You'll see what I'm saying. right? Who these people are, you got might have to do the knowledge. So what does it say? Look, Cherokees did not build mounds, nor did they bury their dead in mounds, nor under piles of stone. Cherokees did not move into North Carolina until a plague had greatly weakened the mound builders. These are the Moors now. You can't separate the Moors and the mound builders now because it's already been proven in court. So these mound builders who were Moors, who were also so-called American Indians, right? This is why these dudes be so butthurt. They just can't handle it. By mound builders, he means my ancestors, the aesthetic Creeks or of Mayan descent. See, because this was a part of the war. The Cherokees killed or drove off the mound builders. They burned the mound build temples and then they replaced them with Cherokee towns, council members. See? Because all the Cherokees was a lot of them was converting to Christianity and they were getting their goods from the Portuguese and they were allowing Congolese and these other types of European free white people to come over here and work for them and undercut the people that was already here. The Cherokee were members of the Appalachian Confederacy and allies with the Creeks until the early 1700s. The people in the South Carolinas and the northeast tip of Georgia, that's the Catawba, Osage, Ojibwe, now called the Lower Cherokees, see, were not considered to be ethnic Cherokees by the real Cherokees. Who were the real Cherokees? The Ananuia, the Tasalagi, the Shaltalagi, the Gawanakapizi, right? All of that, right? The Cherokees never lived south of the Hiwassee River in North Carolina until after the American Revolution, because these was different so-called people. They were going under the corporate Six Nation jurisdiction, calling themselves something else so that way they could work and get money with these other people, right? They could not have the possibility to build the track rock stone walls. That's right. The only traditional religion the Cherokees involved the worship of conjuring demons. See? The only traditional religion of the Cherokees involved the worship and the conjuring of demons. So again, y'all done hung yourself by your own words. You claiming to be Cherokee and all of that. We ain't never say we was Cherokee. You understand? When the prophet said he was of Cherokee descent, right? But again, I'm thinking that he's using that from the perspective of Kalsalagi, right? Because he's saying that people would know what that means. So he got to use the colloquialism. But he also used the term Muslim, which is an ancient Delaware word. We don't already prove that. The only traditional religion the Cherokees involved in the worship of conjuring demons. In Hicks' day, the conjurers held much power over more conservative, thus the poorer. See? Scammers, warlocks. Get the book Seneca Possessed. It's all about these niggas that started coming in with the fire and brimstone and all of that. Because they was trying to snuff out the real hoodoo and the real so-called Moorish magicians and magi's that was still around in dominions that wasn't infected by these niggas. So while in Northeast Tennessee, North Carolina, some Cherokees absorbed many Jewish religious practices from their Jewish neighbors. See, these Jewish influenced Cherokees became the progressive leaders of the new Cherokee nation, but they were always at odds with the conjurers. See, Hicks converted to Christianity after attending a Methodist. See, that's how they was getting them through what? The Moravian Church. See, the Moravians was getting everybody from all of the nations to come under them, but the Moravians was basically like an exiled Jesuit front. Hicks stated that during the first few years of the Creek-Cherokee War, the Cherokees captured thousands of Creeks who were either burned to death or sold as slaves in Charleston, South Carolina. This is at the same time they saying that the slavery thing was going on. So think about that. These Moors that you see on these plantations and stuff, these were the plantations that were either seized and then they implanted the white people on there, right, to sit on it, or they were straight psyop operations where they was just putting these people there, brainwashing them, and then keeping them away from the greater public. That's why everything was segregated, because it's easy to control a smaller group of people and keep them from the greater world, which everything is owned by the people that you think is the slaves. And those slaves, if they leave this area, they're going to be captured and sold. The white people themselves. We can read that in The Forgotten Cause of the Civil War. So Hicks stated that during a few years of the Cherokee were killed in battle. Most of their villages were burned. Ultimately, the Cherokees lost all of the lands they had won when they had signed the peace treaty with the Creeks. The Creeks, again, were the Hebrew Moors, the Muslims, the people who had God on their side, or a semblance of some sort of spiritual anchoring to something other than the old Harashef ways of trying to conjure these AI things that back then we would call demons, to try to give them power. So yeah, all of these slaves that they capturing is slaves, is POWs. Then those POWs were sold at Charleston. Then from Charleston, they sold them into the plantation system. And they would just recycle. That's why you would get sold from one plantation, and the nigga come get you, bring you right to the next plantation. On your way, you see all these free people and all of that. They can't do nothing because you under the Transportation Act. See what I'm saying? They just calling it Jim Crow now. Because still the brutish, right? At this period, so they under old Moorish law. And these were the people coming in here trying to blow everything up and turn everything against us. So at this time, the Irish is melanated. Everybody's melanated, man. Everybody's melanated. Everybody in power ruling is melanated. Look, this how deep it is. These people don't own and rule nothing. Everything is in the name of the Moors. I'm sorry, it's not our fault. It's just what it is, man. Like, y'all gotta just eat it. You gotta eat it. And we just proved now. So when y'all say y'all Cherokee, now when they bring that up, you gotta start looking at them sideways, because I just read you we know who the mound builders were, without a doubt. And now we also know who the Cherokees were, without a doubt. So it's a wrap. So by calling yourself American Indian in that way, and you're identifying with the people who was trying to usurp everybody and wind up getting their land took by the same niggas that they teamed up with to to take over. That's why I gotta come back to us. Look, not even the Pope. That's why you got a Creole Pope now. The Holy Roman Emperor gifts to the throne of St. Peter of the Pope with the Muslim inscription. The chair has not been in the modern times in its worn out effort to donate it by the Holy Roman Emperor Charles the Bald More, and gave to the Pope present in his return, being crowned Holy Roman Emperor by the Pontiff, thereby making him divinely anointed ruler of Central Europe. This papal ceremony had been initiated by his grandfather Charlemagne. It was a terrible trouble. The Muslim Saracens had overrun Sicily, southern Italy, and were menacing Rome. They needed help from the emperor, and in that Charles could not give the papacy support, but badly needed the Pope, right? And turned to the Byzantine emperor for assistance, and angered the Pope of Rome, and became the first Pope, was then assassinated. Napoleon's troops discovered the Muslim Declaration throne of St. Peter. This is the throne of St. Peter. And on the back of the throne of St. Peter, right, it says, there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. Muhammad with an O, not the one with the U. And the back of this throne is a so-called Muslim headstone, who some say is Bilal's. You see how it's got this Hebrew star on it, the hex alpha? So the Pope sits, and he has to sit on it at one point, but they can't get a Jesuit thing. So that's why I think they got this guy, this this Creole dude. So they're all under the Moorish Empire because we put them all under so much scrutiny and pressure by striving to enforce the Sharifian law that it became, it became just the way that things work. They didn't have jurisdictional powers, so they had to start to break us down from within. You understand? And the way they did it was through the babies and all that, the interbreeding. And then once the interbreeding happened, they took land, and then more land is taken, and next thing you know, boom. But we have other companies too, like the Regency of Algiers, which was set up by the German French Barbarossa brothers. You know what I'm saying? We had that going on. And so when the Moorish Empire fell, it kind of reorganized as the Osmanli Moorish, so-called Ottoman Empire. But it started again in America, as they refer to as the Ottoman Quam, or the Ottomans. The Ottomans that they got there today, right? They are the remnant, right, post of the ones who had babies with the so-called Zambos, right, which then created all of the what they call the so-called Spanish, the fake Spanish races they wanted to turn into some sort of corporate thing that they could rule through the Six Nations. The Akomanguean is a diverse family of indigenous language primarily spoken in Old Moorish Mexico, and as the neighboring groups in Mexico included the Mixtec, the Mixtezoquian, the Totonacan, right, and the Mayan languages. The Otomanquean itself is comprised of several major branches, including the Otopamian, the Pololocan, the Mixtecan, the Zapotecan, the Chichimetecan, the Chichimeca, right? And the Subtiyaba Telopiacan, right? The Old Turkey, which again is Tuscarora, aka North Carolina. No, am I bugging? Yeah. Under Mount Arabia, which again is now in modern day Georgia. You can look that up. You can go to Mount Arabia. It's mad mystic up there. Collectively known as the Al-Saina Talata, the three languages, the Ottoman Turkish, Arabic, and Persian. See? Ottoman Turkish was the official literary language, while Arabic was the legal and religious language. Persian was initially the literary and high court language before being largely replaced by Ottoman Turkish. Now, the Persian that they're talking about is really Urdu, right? Which was the high language spoken by by Moors of the old Mauryan dynasty when they was ruling in the high cultures of that era, which then was transferred to the Mughals and those types of people. So by the time we start getting into the modern era, everything start bugging. You understand? So we have thoughts and battles, but it got to a point where, like I said, these people just started retreating, and all of the sellout niggas started coming out and really making headway. You know, and so a lot of the monarchies that was actually melanated started getting bleached out, or being killed, or put under heavy exile, and then decoy families are then set up for them. The book Rebels, Imposters, and Scoundrels. You'll see what I'm talking about. This right here, what you see here in the left-hand side, that's the crown that the Holy Roman Emperor would wear. Right next to him is the golden bull. You know how they had the papal bull? Well, this existed before that, because this was taken from Bavarian Moorish Germany, Old High German, in which the Pappenheim, that's the ruling family dynasties of knights that would get together, and they would crown their sovereign under their new king under the papal bull, the golden bull, in Friesing or Freising, Germany, or Algermania. And then from there, once the Roman Italian papacy mirrored that. They started putting out their shit under the title Golden Bull. You see what I'm saying? The Holy Roman Emperor would be in the Hansa states of what is now Greater Germany. This was the Ku Klux Klan outfit, because the militia of the 16 and 1700s was all Moors. This is not I'm saying, this is facts. That's why Anthony Johnson was buying so many slaves. He wasn't buying black people like that. The black people he did get was indentured servants. They were free white persons, so he had to free them at a certain time, whereas the Caucasian people could be owned indefinitely unless they claimed Islam. See what I'm saying? Because it was a bicameral system. You had the Moors and the British. They only tell us about the British side of everything. You understand? But at the same time, the British king had sway, the Moorish king had sway, because they was in the union. And they was sharing their resources. You understand? That's why it got confusing, because you had Moors going from one side to the next, doing crimes in one jurisdiction and trying to get away in the next jurisdiction. Like, it was crazy. So they started having Moors have to take oaths of allegiance and shit like that. And then that's when it went crazy, because then, again, this is where Bibles and all this other type of shit start coming in. You understand? It becomes a problem. So more clear lines had to be drawn. More conventions had to be had. See? Look, the Moorish distribution of the barbarous tribes. Why would they call Indian tribes barbarous? Because this was the Barbary coast. This was the barbarous coast. This is where we was bringing them in, shipping them out. All of this was under the jurisdictional territory. That's why they only had the little colonies here. They had to share. They had to just eke out. Morocco is here. This middle picture is coming from the CIA document from the 60s. Next to that, we got Granada. So the different dynasties of Moors that was ruling had passed on that rulership, but then some of their sons or daughters became Christian or married into Christian families or became Hindu or Muslim, and then took the territory. And like you didn't have passports. You wasn't dealing with it like that. You had safe travel. That's what it was called, because you wasn't under the Transportation Act. You was in league with the king. Anymore, anywhere was in league with the king. You couldn't do nothing to them, because the king was also a Muslim. He just was, but his crown was Christian. You understand? They never explained peerage to us. So we always got to look at it through what they show us with the knights. All of them people was melanated, man. Where was these niggas getting ostrich feathers and all of that in Denmark, bro? What white people was learning to sew in the caves? What was they doing? Y'all can't be everything. Y'all can't be we're the only ones that could be everything, because we was Persian, we was all of this shit. But what we always was in between all of that was Moors. We understood that, and that was understood all over the planet, especially when you came in habit. That's why you had so many people trying to impersonate us. This is Kenneth Douglas. This is what a bust of Kenneth Douglas of the Dub line of Dublin, the founder of Dublin. This is what this Moor looked like. This is a Hebrew with Gaelic and Egyptian roots. What we call the black plates. We used to call them dub plates, right? You know why? You know what the real dub plates are? Real dub plates are found in Ireland. It's a thing called a shale. It's a type of rock that grows almost vertically where you could just tap it and it comes out in like a sheet. And they put they make their shingles and shit out of it. It's impervious to tornado types of shit. They get, you understand? So we're always recycling the history that everybody telling us is not ours. You know what I'm saying? Damn it. So stuff starts getting crazy, really crazy around the time that the war starts with Japan and all of that. That's when it really started getting stupid. Because what Japan wants to do, they want to set themselves up to be the only sultanate or whatever. They want to be the only imperial power at this point because they think everybody else is basically compromised. Okay, this is where the Axis issue starts coming in. And so because the old Moroccan Empire is falling over here, and the so-called Moors or the merchant marines is getting, caught up in so much different beefs all over the world, that it becomes paramount for us to regroup and try to figure out how to establish some sort of front. So they start doing that. So what happens is the Axis powers were a coalition of all American, Moorish, Ottoman, Turkish, so-called military nations, primarily Germany, Italy, Japan, that opposed the so-called Allied powers during World War II. The arguments, a series of agreements between Germany and Italy, and later expanded to Japan in terms and became the Anti-Comintern Pact. Right, this internment of enemy aliens in the First World War was a global phenomenon. See, war camps holding civilian as well as military prisoners could be found on every continent. You see what I'm saying? We had taken over so much, but it was a Pyrrhic victory because we had half the world population in jail, on on war camps and concentration camps and shit, right? To stop them from doing slavery, right? So it turned into slavery. Trying to stop them from doing slavery, we turned it into a slavery operation. Each had its own internment system, and each with its own internal threshold of tolerance for violence. You see, we was bugging. Everybody's territory was different. So you might go here, and if you steal an apple, they might cut your whole hand off. You might go here, they might give you a fine. You might go here, the Bey might put you in slavery, might put you in the army. This was the old ways. This is what was happening. And so it got to the point where, like I said, Mussolini, under the auspices of Victor Emmanuel, aka um His Majesty Haile Selassie, Hirohito in Japan, under and Hirohito was under the auspices now and starting to get broke down. And then you had the Sultan of Morocco in America, and they all basically supplying aspects of the front, while at the same time, right, trying to create a diplomatic solution for the deterioration of what was happening. But it got to the point where Japan was like, "The hell with that. We trying to take it all." You understand? And so they went for Dolo, and then going for Dolo, that then forced China, right, which is basically they invade China. They start bugging, eating people, blowing people up. They was violent. So while all of this fervor is happening, remember, these are melanated people. Go back and look at the video before this. This is all melanated people I'm talking about. In power, with guns, with cannon, with armory, with artillery, with hundreds of soldiers. But on TV, we don't hear it. On history, we're never taught this part. What they told us is, oh, your grandfather was in the merchant marines. The hell is that? During the Spanish American War, that's where we was at. We was fighting global wars all over the place. But then once the high command in the United States military changed, and they had taken a foothold in it, that's when they started to create the segregated armies specifically, so that way they could get us to fight against the white version over there, and they could get and vice versa. So that creates a fervor of nationalism all over the world, where people are now identifying that. And like I said, people like Black Hitler and these people start coming to power. And like I said, through the Thule Society and them types of peoples, they start really putting in work. They start going against the system itself, creating their own societies, their own versions of that, right? So you would have New Swabia over there, you would have Germantown over here. All of that used to be Moorish. All of that used to be melanated people. That's why when you ask people in Germantown places, well, when did your people get here? Oh, they got here around the 1800s, the late 1800s. See, when the wars happened, when they got switched up, when the black Germans had to set up what they called the Hanseatic Leagues, where the Hessians was fighting. This is the Hessians. They never talk about them, Moors. But you've heard about the Hessians. You just don't know who's a Hessian. Remember the Headless Horseman? That's a story of the Hessian, of a Hessian that they did dirty. But because he was a Moor from Salamanca, he had magic and was able to revive himself and get revenge on them all. Sleepy Hollow. And then what happened was the whole town was great before he happened. And then once that happened, the town people killed him. That's when the town went to hell. That's when all of the trees died and all that shit. Because he was a soldier that actually protected the village, or the Hessians had protected the village. But the history flip it to say that he came to destroy it and they killed him. So he cursed them and kept coming back, as the story says. But again, that's just fiction. Wink, wink. Right? So here he goes. So what happened was there was a split between the original ones, like I said, and the other ones. So the other ones, the white ones, right, got attacked by the black ones. There's history. Go back and read the story about, or the history reels about the Reichstag being hit by UFOs. But the night that the Reichstag burned up, it was UFOs above the Reichstag, they say. Some of the old conspiracy shows will show you that. That was the so-called Thule Moors, the Thule Society Moors, them fighting against the fake German uh, insurgency dudes that was trying to set up the whole play to eventually set up what became the state of Israel later for the Ashkenazims to set up their end game, basically. And so these so-called black Germans, these Moorish Germans under Mohammed Hossein, over there, over here they had Black Hitler. Over in what you call it, they had Ho Chi Minh, right? They had Garvey, but see, Garvey got caught up in the Africa thing, and that's when he think. But see, he was a Marquis, allegedly of Salisbury. So the Moors was going through heavy war at this time on a political scale all over the world. That's why in Indiana Jones, you see them talking to the Sultan, right? And the Sultan, he trying to negotiate. He want to get the car and all that. Remember? All of the Moors in that. Because the so-called Nazis at this time is a twofold situation. You got the so-called black ones, you got the white ones. Just like you had the so-called Tartars. You had the black Tartars and you had the white Tartars. Just like Americans, you got so-called black Americans, right? And you got so-called white Americans, right? So why was it different back then? Look at the prophet's mustache. Now, again, I'm not equating the prophet to Hitler, because what the prophet did in his wisdom was he set the record straight as to the fact that Moors, us ourselves, we are patriotic, so-called true American citizens, meaning that we are part of the preamble class to the seventh article, as well as the supremacy clause, meaning we fall under the protections of the amity that exists for us. So we don't have to take names like Ethiopian, black, Negro, colored. You understand? But that mustache that he had, that was what the so-called, that's how you knew who was supporting. You know what I'm saying? Like the little gestures and shit like that. You know what I mean? Was how you know who's down with shit. So this Axis power thing was seen as a liberation movement by darker skinned people in the world, because they're seeing the encroachment of all of these so-called white trustee decoy countries using the Six Nation shit, acting like Moors, as you know, when they dress up like Shriners, to then give them the spiritual permission to sit in the seats and act like that, and act as if there's some sort of continuation of us, right? All to keep this theater going. And then what they do, they start attacking the upper class. On the ship of the Titanic, that was all rich Moors. Jacob Astor and them, I keep telling you, those was all rich Moors, rich Moorish families that wasn't with all of this shit. They was the ones financing the Axis, the real Axis, not the fake shit that the CIA and them niggas was cooking up at Montauk Point and all of that. That eventually they had to deal with, because the real so-called Thule Society, the real New Schwabians, the real so-called Nazis, black ones, they had bounced. They blew up the Reichstag, flipped on them niggas, took the tech. By 38, by 32, between 32 and 38, they amassed enough power where they bounced. And then what happens now is they got to keep the war going. So that's where these actors come in. And now they got to keep the story going. And so now all the serials is with the white man and the white Hitler and the white roles, because now they just pivoted the people into that. Because these niggas don't give a damn. Muhammad and them, they out. Look, Moorish spy at Gibraltar. At Gibraltar, Amor has been charged with spying within the fortress. The second Moor gave evidence that the prisoner was formerly employed, see, by the RIF, right? Was employed at RIF, Morocco, America, by a German firm. Islam? You see what's happening? You see? I showed you in the Corn Palace, they had the swastika because they was fighting us. They was fighting anybody that had connection to that energy that they had now turned literally on its axis, and then had been doping people up for years, have been doping everybody up, putting the LSDs in the water between that time, and then got them white people that had been displaced that now is in there, right? Because they had been captives up until then. They had been captives of war. We just read it. They had been captives that had now been set free because there was too much shit going on. So now they get to live in the ruins and be the new Germans. So they don't give a fuck what you tell them they are. They just want the bombings and all that shit to stop. All of melanated troops then pulled out. Now new melanated troops is showing up, and they Americans, freeing them from the dummy fake Nazis, right? That have been basically stealing everything from that point on. All the technology stopped after the black ones bounced. And it just turned into a looting operation. They just started looting everything. Yeah, so we're of the nobility class that all of this was happening around us. So we just think we regular black Americans, we just out here just live. No, we're affected by this because it's our soldiers that's going to these wars, fighting these wars, only realizing after what's going on. The Corn Palace was built by the Tsclaves. We just read that the Cherokees didn't build nothing. We just read the Cherokees was the ones that worked to kill out the Moors because they was working with the Jesuits against the original clans, the traditionalists, the ancients, us. And we beat them almost to death and put them in camps. Those camps became plantations, psychological places to put them, and the Congolese and the Portuguese and the British and whoever else got wrapped up. But the free white persons who may have been prisoners, who may have been criminals in British galleys, who have been put under the contract of some dirty Moor to come over here and fight at the head of an army leading Moors. That's why you see all of these images of all these black soldiers with a white soldier in the middle, at the front, as the one telling them what to do. Because he's the slave. He's the Slav who's leading the ex-prisoners of war in the new campaign under whatever Bey is paying them. So these Moors, they do their thing. They put the smackdown on these niggas to the point where now they force them to have to keep going with the lie. Look, this is Oklahoma. This is Oklahoma. This Moor right here. We had our own armies in our communities. That's why they attacked our communities the way they did. All of the Tartaria and all of that Barbary, it's all the same thing. Tartars are just the Asiatic Moors who got Russianized. Look right here. Look, they go to Red Baron, Sufi Ahmed. They go to Poster. This was the posters that used to be out here. People say, oh no, that's Belgian French. No, these are Americans. You know how you know? Because the fezzes ain't marked. See how there's no marks on their fezzes? Go look at the fezzes on the East Africans that was in the Congo region doing all of that shit. Look at all their fezzes marked up. All them people Swahili speakers. Moors from other nations like America will go and fight in wars in Japan, in Ethiopia, in Poland, in places like that. The same way the Polish will come and help the Haitians. And then after the war, what happens? They get to live there. And that's how you wind up with a little Polish town in Haiti. See what I'm saying? You understand? Because there's the same people. And our army was around. Look, he'll go Elijah Muhammad. Look, under the two flags, dictatorships, the Germans used the Nazi swastika from 1922 AD to 1945. The Japanese Navy flew the Rising Sun, which was called the Mikado, with rays during World War II, readopted it when? In 1952. So now peep this. Now look at that. Look at the Mikado. Right? This is why this is why Hoover and these niggas were scared. Hoover, another so-called dirty Moor. Another Moor. Dirty. Fighting to keep shit the way it is. Right? Now look at the Mikado and look at the top of Muhammad Speaks. What you see? People don't get it, B. There was a lot of power at one point, and these Moors was just not even paying attention. And so the white people thinking that these niggas is agents against America. No. They are a part of this society that nobody is talking about, but everybody is trying to get over. That is also a part of this old nobility that is refusing to go along with the orchestrated drama that they're calling this war, that is really there to get rid of all of the nobility that we talk about. And so they had agents and was willing to supply people to facilitate this happening, which is why we was against the communists, which is why Prophet Noble came out against all of that shit. That's why he said we not Negro, black, colored, Ethiopian, because these were the organizations, right, some of them, that was really down with what was going down, with what was happening. So the Thule Society amongst the blacks was all over the world. A lot of the hoodoo people was with it. A lot of the jazz musician people was with it during the war. That's why at certain points they would be used by the actual United States military to move messages and shit like that. These are your ancestors. This is the Moorish military. This military they got today is based on this. What they do today, they could not do if it wasn't for what we set up or what was set up by our ancestors with this shit. It's just facts, bro. So, like I said, by the time it got to this level, it was pretty much too late. They had already decided, okay, we got to take this white Hitler thing to the next level, and we got to infuse it with the satanic stuff even more, so that way we can now keep control of the white people who are coming back with these stories about all of these black temples and shit that they seeing, and all of these regal black people in Asia and all of that. So they blackmail elements of the high command to start going in and shutting down the sultanates that existed in Asia. Look, we just didn't leave. We wouldn't build bases when we would invade back in the days. What we started doing was just building cities, or taking the cities that they had left and went into disrepair, and then we would repair them, set them up, and then years later, the population want the city back. That's what happened with Timbuktu after we shut down the Songhai Empire. We shut them down so well, like, because it was like nothing, because they ain't had no guns, they ain't had nothing. They ain't had no cannons, they ain't had no tanks, they ain't had nothing. We went in there and just shut it down, and then basically restarted the economy, and then went up, built up Timbuktu again, and then started to try to extend the reach. But after a couple of years, it just got to be too much, and then it was just like, now let's just go. So they bounced, and then the babies that they had with the people that was there eventually set up their own jurisdiction. See what I'm saying? Set up their own cultures based on that. That's why we so related to people like the Hausa and the Tuareg, the Bambara, all them West African, the Cameroonians, all the ones that look like us, the Nigerians even, because we colonized them first. Sorry. That's why I keep coming over here, because it's an ancestral thing. It's ancestral. It's because here was heaven to them, to everybody. They got to be amongst the gods. You understand? They couldn't do like that when they was in their own place, because they didn't have no infrastructure anymore. Oh, yeah. See. So yeah. So we, like, half the world was a slave camp, because niggas just ain't want to do right. So everybody had to band together to come against us, to shut everything down and end the millennial reign. But it ended in such a way that by the time the ancestors like her realized what happened, it was gone. All those exposition fairs with the laid out stuff that you see with all our stuff, those were all of the cities that were conquered. So they were able to control them and then destroy them. Yeah. Anybody else? Hmm. Yeah, I can read that. Oh, I read right now. The Moroccan victory was facilitated by several factors, including internal strife within the Songhai Empire and the Moroccan army's superior weaponry. The Songhai, although large in numbers, were outmatched by the Moroccans due to the muskets and cannons. After the defeat, the Songhai Empire was absorbed into the Moroccan Empire. That's why Abu Bakr and them had to come back over here. Mansa Musa and all of that was American money. Because he was the Sultan at one point. So he was getting money and gold from South America, aka Rome, aka Brazil, aka Portugal, aka the Incan Holy Roman Empire. You understand? So right here, the sultanates with the Malay archipelago, many regions that are now part of Indonesia and Malaysia were historically under control of various sultanates. That's why the Americans have all of the power in the Philippines, or had it, because the Moros were our brothers and sisters that stayed there after the majority of us had to come back mainland to hold it down against the Romans, aka the Spanish. The Japanese occupation directly impacted these sultanates, with their rulers either cooperating with the Japanese or being forced out of power. See, Japanese occupied had significant impact on the local populations, including the implementation of forced labor. See, the suppression of the nationalists, that's us, and the imposition of Japanese cultural practices. Because these were the new Japanese that was coming in and shutting everybody down. They were getting rid of the ruling class, which was the Joma, the real Japanese, the Joma and the Ainu, who were the samurai class. The Japanese occupation had significant impact on the local populations, exactly, including forced labor and all of the war crimes that they committed. See, that's why they got shut down. And once the emperor abdicated, but prior to that, there was the Sini War and all types of other wars. But all these countries, like I said, are related. On your left is the Japanese flag, imperial flag. On your right is the Malian imperial or national flag. See what I'm saying? And to be a samurai, you had to have what? Moorish blood, right? But there was no so-called black samurais in Asia. So how does that make sense? Stupid. Same thing. Here's another imperial flag of Mali. And then here is the Spanish flag of Spain. So the era of new imperialism was the era, like I said, where all of these monarchs had got banished from Europe and then wound up going into Africa, assuming African identities, and then using a white administrators who are now acting as kings and queens in their state to be able to funnel their money and all of that stuff too. And then they became the rulers and all of that of the present so-called African strata. That's why Idi Amin could be referred to as the King of Scotland, because he's a descendant of Wallace and them. So we already saw that the so-called original Zionist Jews was Moors from Harlem, and the so-called Palestinians were Moors as well. Those identities were also co-opted during the war, in which they are what they are now. To perpetuate the war on the Axis. Anybody have any questions? Here is Mohammed Hossein giving the salute to the American so-called Moor, American Indian. See what I'm saying? thing, but something happened with the thing. Can y'all hear me? Okay. See? It's bugging. Y'all can hear me, right? That was funny. See? The same type of architecture, the same type of statue. Again, I'm not talking about anything to do. I'm not even going into I already went into the white Adolf dude. I'm talking about the dude and what they was really doing, who was really doing what with the black sun technology. And this is them. And they was into the American Moors. That's why you find so much Moorish American stuff and images. Because this right here, Chago Macho, that's the king of America. He's one of the kings. In that list of kings that I showed you in a couple of videos ago. Next week, we'll get into the white side of that situation, but just wanted to leave off with this. So the Sultan, or one of the Sultans of Europe at this point, at that time in the left. In the middle is one of the Moors who owned the American Moors that own the oil wells. And then there's the National Army. You see, they got the national flag. Everybody had their own armies. Everybody was doing their thing. And everybody supported everybody until they didn't. Last one. This is the Pickelhaube. Like I showed you the fez that they had at all the Roman Emperor wore. This is the war crown. This the same eagle Ghostface had on the joint. And you see them with the Pickelhaube. That's the point at the top. These are the war horns that they used to use and bring into battle. Like that whole scene in Apocalypse Now, where they're coming in with the flight of the Valkyries. That's based on how the Moors used to come in with the thunderous trumpets and all of that with this shit. Anybody else? So like I said, all of this was between the 20s, 30s, and 40s. We were still running shit, record shop. We just wasn't told in the context of how it was actually happening. The Afrikaners coming over, that's just about white people trying to inject a new breed of white nationalism into the dying aspects of white nationalism today. But this doesn't mean that white nationalists are gone. Like, you got white racists that's just waiting in the cut for some wild shit to go on or whatever. But I don't think it's going to happen the way that they want. It's going to happen more in the context that they're going to have to fight to actually protect us. That's how the whole thing go. And that's why I think the Masonic thing happens with them like that, because ultimately that's what's going to be. Because they can't trust anybody else other than us, because they got into this by getting us to get them freedom. The only reason why people ain't bomb this place is because we still here. So get these books. There's a term going around called black fatigue. That was coined by this sister right here. They need to stop hating and give her props. She the one who created that, and let everybody know that that's some fake shit. That's just something that she coined to be able to describe what we have to go through day to day to just deal with basic so-called white society. And now the white people are trying and black people are trying to misconstrue it into being we're just tired of how black people act. Yes, we are. You know what I mean? But that has nothing to do with so-called black fatigue. Black fatigue is a cultural phenomenon brought upon by years of induced trauma based upon dealing with dissociative identity disorder. You know what I'm saying? Perpetuated by a continuous onslaught of depravity in the form of media and psychotropic drugs. So definitely, if you haven't already, check out www.aseer.com. Really appreciate you guys supporting, coming through. This was part 2 of the Axis Power. We're going to get into part 3 because I couldn't fit it all in. If you haven't already, definitely check out www.cordovaorganics.com. And if you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe to ADOT app. It's on Apple and Google Play right now. If you check that out. Anybody have any questions or anything, you can hit me up at houseofl@hotmail.com. And yeah, we can take it from there. Thank you guys for the $30 to $DS418.com. That's through Cash App. I appreciate it. If you can't do Cash App, you could also do PayPal, which is at ducateers@gmail.com. You know, I appreciate it. And again, if you haven't, also go to www.aseerducateers.com and get your copy of the Dark Scope 418, the world's most dangerous comic book novel. This is the cover. If you haven't, so I definitely appreciate you guys. And yeah, so next week we'll deal with part 3. There's so much going on with it, but yeah, Moors, we back on top. You know what I mean? And now is the time, inshallah. So again, I thank you guys for the support, and you can definitely hit me at houseofl@hotmail.com. All right. So yeah. So think about this. I'll probably have this up next week. It'll be on the app sooner though, so you'll be able to watch part 1 and part 2 through the app if you want it. All right. All right, guys. Peace.